When Android moved to the Honeycomb version, when the tablet APIs first came out, there were two major additions to the programming model at that point. One was fragments, which are relatively complicated up to extremely complicated, and the other was the action bar. The action bar, my own experience was something like this. I looked at fragments and I saw some basic ones and I thought, boy, that's kind of involved. And then I spent a lot of time getting to know it, and it was a bit of a hurdle to overcome. And for that reason, I partly looked at action bars and went, man, I don't know if I really want to tackle that anytime soon. I don't want to go through another battle like I went through with fragments. And when I finally sat down and said, all right, let me look at the action bar, I actually feel kind of badly about it, because it turns out action bars are incredibly simple. They're one of the easiest things to do in all of Android once you see the mechanism, and we'll use it here, and that's how I've added an icon to the action bar in the little Carlos Ray app. So I want to demonstrate that now. Now here is the web page in the API guide for action bars. Now there's a design guide as well that affects the look and feel, but right now I mostly just want to show the programmatic aspects to it. Now the action bar is this little black area along the top at the moment, and they show here we have an app icon as well as a title, and then a couple of what they're calling action items, and then the ... represents the action overflow, or the additional menu items that didn't make it out onto the action bar. So this is the location we're talking about. So the idea is that it does give you a space for giving your app an identity in the user's location, makes important actions prominent and accessible in a predictable way. Like you can see here, it's very clear how to search in this app. You just click the little magnifying glass. Or how to execute something, you click the little play icon. It's right there. And there are likely other things inside the so-called overflow menu, shown with the 3 dots. Now, how do you use it? Now, this web page, again, likes to talk about the support library, and action bar is a class in the support library, but since we are operating well above API 11, in fact, we're up to API 16 at this point, then I can just use android.app.actionbar. Now they talk about adding one, again, not a problem for us because we're not in the compatibility library, and I certainly don't want to remove one. But how do I add action items? And that's the part that I'm interested in. So in order to add action items, we use our menu resource. So here is a resource whose root element is menu, and inside it has item elements. Each item element has its own ID that are defined inside the item, and then potentially an icon and a title. Now this is used for any menu resource, not just action bar items, but all we have to do to add additional items to the menu is to add item tags inside of this root menu tag. Now one of the callbacks in activities is called onCreateOptionsMenu. And on Create Options Menu, it takes a menu as an argument, and we do something called inflating the menu. Nice visual metaphor of, take our XML and inflate it into a series of objects. Once you have inflated the menu, then you call super and you're all set. Now the inflate method on the inflator takes r.menu. Whatever the file is that contains all of our menu items inside it. Here's where life gets interesting. If you want something to appear on the action bar itself rather than just in the overflow menu, the only change you have to make is to put in an attribute called show as action. Now this is using the compatibility library. If I look at later ones, well, let me stick with it here, and then I'll show you later how to do it. So how to do it in the older ones. Now, if you put in show as action, you have values like if room or with text or both. And if there is room on the display, then suddenly this icon, which has been represented in the overflow menu, will appear on the action bar itself. In other words, it's a little one-liner. a one-liner in order to make a menu entry in the overflow menu suddenly show up on the action bar itself. Now, there's also a with text attribute. If room will make it so that if there's an icon associated with the action, that will show up. With text, we'll put text next to it if there's even that much room. The icon, as they say, is optional but recommended. They talk about the design guide to get the right iconography, and there's a set of standard action bar icons available from a downloads page. You can try to say always, but that's a little risky. There may not be room because it doesn't know what to do in that case. There's also a never. A lot of people put settings as a never. They don't want that on the action bar. They'd rather have that in the overflow menu. And the other options are if room and with text. Now, how do we handle an action when it gets clicked? Well, the other callback in our action is called on options item selected. Takes a menu item instance. So this will get invoked automatically when somebody clicks one of the menu options, including the icons on the action bar. And then we use, believe it or not, a switch statement in Java. We switch on the ID coming from that item. So the menu item getItemID method returns the int that was the ID that we specified in our XML file. We specified an ID name in the XML file. It gets compiled into a resource, and now we're getting that integer resource. And then you have case statements for the individual actions. And whichever action matches, you go ahead and use and do some kind of return. And it is traditional at the bottom to say, well, if none of them matched, even though that shouldn't happen, but if none of them matched, just call super on options item selected, and you're all set. So that's pretty much it. There really isn't much more to it. They talk about a few more options, like a split action bar, but that's about all we have. So let me actually go to the code and show you how this works. Here again is my main activity. My main activity here has an onCreateOptions menu method. And in that, I get the menu inflator and inflate r.menu.main. Let me access that file. In r.menu.main, I have a menu. It has two items. One has the label, the ID action joke, and the other is my preferences, which is going to take me to the settings that I'll get to in the next section. The action joke has an icon that I got from the Android drawables. Remember that there are your own resources that you can provide and icons you can create. There are the ones they mentioned you could download as well. In this case, I'm grabbing a drawable out of the Android library called Icon or IC Media Play. So this looks like a little play button. The show as action attribute I set to if room and with text, with the pipe in between. So that'll say if there's plenty of room, then I'll see the icon and the text. If there's only a little bit of room, I'll see the icon. And the title is get joke, which of course is a string resource. Back in the main activity, when you click one of these things, that invokes on options item selected with that menu item. So I have a switch statement off of the item ID. And if I am telling a joke, if I'm calling the joke menu entry, then again, I'm going to deal with the shared preferences in the next section. But essentially, I am instantiating that async task for the joke and executing it with my first and last names, and just return true. If instead I'm trying to change the preferences, and in the preferences what we're going to see in the next section is I'm going to change the default first and last name, then that would be setting an intent to go to that settings activity and going there. And by default, returning super, being all set there. So this is pretty much the same functionality I already had. The only difference is that now I'm responding to menu items. If I take a look at the actual icon, at the actual emulator, you'll see now I have this little button here, and that's the joke button. And when I click on it, then it works, it gets me a new joke. When Hans Doctor breaks the build, you can't fix it because there's not a single line of code left. Yes, very good. Or let's try another one. Hans Doctor can compile syntax errors. That's a good one. I'd like to have that skill. That would be great. Under the ... you see I still have my settings menu. That's what I'm going to demonstrate in the next section. Now this is the if room. Let me rotate the emulator here. And now you see what happens with an if room with text. It actually grabbed the text out of that menu item and decided that there is enough blank space on this action bar to show the text as well. So I'm showing the icon and the menu item. And of course, everything still works the same way. Doesn't bug hunt, does that signifies the probability of failure? He goes bug killing, yes. Types with one finger, points at the keyboard does the rest. I would like that skill as well. That would be very nice. At any rate, that's the action bar. Not a lot to it, actually. It's not that complicated. Remarkably simple to use. You just put your items inside your XML menu. You inflate the menu. You put in your show as action attribute in order to say whether it should show up on the action bar as opposed to in the overflow menu. You put in a switch statement inside the on options item selected method in order to see which one was selected, and then you go do whichever one was selected. End of story. Very simple, very easy to use, and that's the action bar. So in the next section, I'll show the other menu item I have here, which is the preferences. That'll give us our one example of a fragment in this base course and show you how you can use a fragment to change the default first and last names of the hero in this particular application.